to start recording it and give it over to Amit to start. But I'm going to, so Amit, again, this is a lovely group of founders, what I think is the best in the world, all early stage, lots of different industries, all just killing it in their own right. You know, so throughout this workshop, we will have different breaks about every, let's say like 5-10 minutes to check in with the cohort. Amit, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay.
Yeah,
I see the button. I'm good.
Perfect. So
okay, well, thank you. Do you want to do an intro, or what do you want to do?
No, I'll let you do your own intro.
Oh, awesome. Okay, great. Hey, so if I may ask you guys, so, well, great to meet you all. For those of you who are able to do so, could you turn on your video? It's much easier for me to talk to, like, when I can see people out there as opposed to.
Oh, weirdo.
Hey, how are you, Megan? Velka? Anybody else? Brave enough? Bold enough? Anybody else took a shower today? No? Shaved?
Don't
worry, I can't smell you if you didn't take a shower. It's okay. It's all right.
I haven't taken a shower in days.
Great, wow.
Did you just hear
Where
him?
are you? Oh,
I haven't taken a shower.
You're sitting in a very comfortable chair.
Why did you
look at that?
Why did...
Okay, awesome. Well, hey, thanks, Elizabeth, for the opportunity, and really excited to meet you guys and chat with you today. So a little bit about my background. I am the CEO and founder of Kernel Labs, which is a startup studio based in Seattle. And we are focused on creating new companies, mostly in the AI space. In a prior life, I spent 20 years at Microsoft as a senior executive. I was a corporate vice president there. And then a few years at Symantec as their chief technology officer and executive vice president. So most of my career in corporate land, and then for the last 5 years in kind of startup land. So very, very, very different. And so Elizabeth and I spoke, I think a couple of months ago, about doing this talk, and we are thinking about different topics that might be interesting, especially for you guys. And so there's a range of things I could talk about. One thing that we converged on was, is the idea of running a data-driven startup. How do you incorporate data into how you run your company? Okay, and so that idea is actually very near and dear to me. And so what I thought I'd do is share my experience, so share my perspective on that, but then also my experiences at Microsoft, at Symantec, but most importantly at my startups, in incorporating data into how we make decisions, why it's important, and that stuff. So feel free to interrupt me, when necessary. Actually, hang on a second. I just got a notification that my speaker isn't working. Can somebody say something?
Yeah, it was working now. I think it just went in and out just for a second, real quick there.
My speaker or my, whoops?
Microphone did.
Microphone did, okay.
But now it's working.
Okay, excellent. Okay, good. Okay, so let me actually share a screen here. One second. Share screen. Which one do I want to share? This one here. Can you see the screen?
I think you just froze a little bit on it.
Man.
Now it's working.
Okay, hang on a second. Let me see if I can shut something down to unfree stuff.
probably all your background of holograms that you have importing people.
Probably. That's probably doing it. Okay. Good. All right. Everybody can see my screen? Okay. So basically, I'm going to talk about startups, what I've learned, all the mistakes I've made, but mostly around data and why that's important and how you can use data as like the core engine, as a core thing by which you can make decisions. And I think data is not just like a peripheral thing that you can talk about occasionally, but in my mind, approach it's fundamentally a cultural thing. It's what the culture of the organization is and how you build around that. So let me talk about what that means. So, when we think about startups, the mythology around it is, really awesome and really enticing. There's absolute creativity and freedom and lots of innovation and people running around doing whatever they want and off in the corner coming.
Hey, Amit, sorry, just
Yes.
have to interrupt you. You are kind of going in and out in a weird digital, your microphone, it kind of has a break, I think, at times.
Crap. Okay, let me see what I can do. Hang on one second. I apologize for that.
Now you're coming in clear. Maybe it's just, yeah.
No, crap. Let me see what I can do here. Give me 1 second. Just indulge me. Not exactly sure why it's cutting in and out.
Maybe
Can you hear me okay now, or is it?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah?
So we'll just continue, and maybe we'll just, have a little bits of breaks every once in a while. It might just be the internet connection.
Yeah.
So no worries.
Can you still see my screen?
I can't see it right now. I can only see you.
Oops. Okay, let's see. Let's go back to screen sharing. What the hell? For a tech guy, you think I'd be a little bit more competent at this, but
Yeah, well, being a senior VP over at Microsoft, I mean, what?
maybe it's, yeah, exactly. It's the Peter principle. You rise to your level of incompetence, and that's what happens. Okay, I think you can see my screen now, right?
Yes.
I've kept it out of presentation mode. Maybe that's what was going on. I don't know. And Elizabeth, I'll look at your video screen, and if suddenly my voice goes out, just raise your hand and I'll know to either repeat myself or whatever. Okay, so anyway, as I was saying, there's this, fantastic mythology around startups, which is very, very enticing. But I think as we all know, and especially the people on this call know, that the reality can be somewhat different, okay? Massive constraints everywhere, okay? Constraints in funding, constraints in people, constraints in customers, huge expectations from all of the above, including investors, employees, and also, at least what I found is the biggest risk in all of this is actually, it's this really weird balance between being really convicted and really believing in your mission and your vision and your statement and your vision statement, but balancing that against being realistic with the risk of just really believing your own propaganda, right? So when you go talk to investors, you go talk to customers, you kind of have to really sell ahead of what you have, of painting this incredible vision of how you are going to be the next unicorn and you have the greatest thing. But you got to be careful about saying, hey, it's great that I've got all this marketing stuff, but there's a big danger, as you all know, I'm sure, of believing your own propaganda. So you have to balance that vision and the passion versus that, okay? So how do you do that? The question is, at least this is the question that I've, this is what it distills down to me, is, faced with this amazing amounts of ambiguity at every angle. Is my product good enough? Do I have product market fit? Will my customer convert? Will I get funding? Am I going to be able to hire the right people? Am I going to be able to retain the right people? How do I, on a day-to-day basis, keep making progress? How do I know that I'm making progress? That's actually more important. How do I measure that progress is actually being made? How do I make sure that everybody in my organization, and also my larger organization, advisors, investors, everybody else, are on the same page? We're talking about the same thing. We're speaking the same language. And then how do I prioritize between the 500 million priorities I actually have and the 50 ideas that I get every day and the 20 new demands I get or the requests I get from customers, from employees? How do all these things, how do I make sense out of all of this? And how do I navigate through all these different constraints and questions and priorities and ambiguity? So, ta-da, here's the answer. No, this is not the answer. This is one approach, one way of looking at it. And what I call this a metrics-driven approach. I'll share a few anecdotes with you. But the key idea here is that you measure everything. And I would argue that everything that actually matters to your startup can in fact be measured. So the first thing that people react to when you say measure everything, they go, yeah, but I can't measure this, I can measure that. Wrong. If it actually matters, you can measure it. Okay? And if you measure it, that actually itself makes a statement. So cultural implication number one is when you say you're going to measure this, you're implicitly making a statement of priority on what is important to you as an organization. And right now I'm talking at a very high level. I'll get into details very quickly. It also means that you start speaking in the language of measurement. So let me give you an example. So in 2013 was when I left Microsoft and I joined Symantec as the Chief Technology Officer. And I'd obviously done my homework, but I hadn't done enough. And when I got there, I'd assumed that my organization would be 800 people, which is still very, very large. But I get there and I meet with my HR person, and she brings along 2 other HR people. I go, hey, who are these 2 people? She goes, well, these people also support your organization. And that should have been a hint for me that I had 3 HR people going, WTF, like why do I need 3 HR people for a few hundred people? Well, it turns out my organization was 3,000 people, okay? And my first question was, what the hell do all these people do? Okay, for like the mission we have, why do we need 3,000 people? And so I spent the next month talking to a bunch of people and saying, hey, what's going on, and getting a sense. And one question that I kept getting uncomfortable with was, everybody said, hey, we're doing all this great work. We have the best security, cybersecurity in the world. We protect against all these threats from Russians and Chinese and North Koreans and Iranians and blah, 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 blah. Like, okay, but how do you know? How do you know you have the best security? How do you know that, this budget I have of $350 million a year is being spent appropriately? How can you tell, how do I know that we aren't just pissing away huge amounts of money, right? How do I answer the questions that the board should ask me? Is the money being spent appropriately? How good are you versus competitors? Are you actually solving customer problems? Okay, that's what really matters. Okay, and so the first thing we did was we said, okay, on a weekly basis, we're first going to start by measuring. Let's start with what matters to customers, which is efficacy of security. So said, okay, hey guys, you go back and come back with a way of measuring that. So he came back and he said, okay, we're going to measure. First thing we're going to do is benchmark against our competitors. So we're going to take McAfee and Kaspersky and Sophos and Trend Micro and Avast and AVG and blah, blah, blah. And we're going to throw a bunch of malware at it and, see how many of them they catch, how many of them that we catch. Okay. Jose, that was a pretty cool trick, whatever you did with your face there. Oh, okay, that's your background thing. His face is floating around. It's kind of distracting, but it's kind of cool. So anyway, they came back with that, and we're like, okay, this is okay. We are in kind of the top quarter. We're the 80th percentile, not bad. So at least that gave us one thing to measure, and the question was, how do we make that number get better and better and better over every week? But that's not enough, because this goes back to the whole propaganda thing. If everybody in the industry actually sucks, okay, then all you're saying is you suck less. It doesn't, you aren't really saying you're solving the customer problem really well. Okay, so there's a difference between having a relative benchmark and having an absolute benchmark. Okay, so challenge the team, okay, how do you actually know whether you are actually solving the problem? So one of the things we did was we created a very large bug bounty program. Okay, now I don't know how much you guys know about cybersecurity, but it turns out that if you discover a vulnerability, a previously undiscovered vulnerability in Windows, by which you can exploit the rest of the operating system, often these things are called zero-day attacks. And we don't have to talk about why they're called zero-day, but they're called 0 days. And a really good 0 day can be worth up to $2 or $3 million on the black market, like a single vulnerability. And the reason why is because cyber criminals can use that vulnerability to infect like 2 billion PCs, okay? And more importantly, nation states like Russians and Chinese and North Koreans and Iranians can use it for cyber espionage. So very valuable stuff. So we had to figure out, how do we incent people to give us really interesting vulnerabilities instead of selling it on the black market to cyber criminals or to spy agencies. Okay, and I won't get into the details of how we did that and why we, what the exact mechanisms were, but we found a way to ground our metrics in real absolute truth. In other words, we could say, how good is our security compared to, how good is the security in comparison to the environment that our customers actually face, not in comparison to what our competitors are doing. Okay, so that's one of the core things, which is you're going to start with the customer experience and say, measure that, measure from the customer experience backwards. Okay, once you start measuring that, then you say, hey, for every $100,000 I'm spending, if of my entire budget, what of it is advancing the agenda of improving our security outcome for our customer versus regressing it versus being indifferent. Okay, so now it has an implication on prioritization. Okay, it also has an implication on budget. Okay, then you go to your managers and leaders and say, hey, every time you talk to me about how great you did and why you deserve a bonus or a raise or more stock or blah, 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 or more budget, tell me how you move the needle for us in security outcomes for our customers. Okay, so it changes the conversation around rewards and metrics and hiring and budget. Okay.
So Amit, maybe we can stop there and see and get some discussion from some of our founders. Are you guys currently doing that with your staff? Are they coming to you, always in that data-driven approach? Are you, and if so, who's doing that out of this group right now? Anyone? I know some of these teams are very small, maybe 1-2 people part of the team, but are you currently tracking any of your, and having it sort of be top of mind in your leadership discussions?
Yeah, we track everything on GameJolt. GameJolt's a platform for gamers and games. All the decisions that we make actually are based on, our KPIs, but also our broader objectives.
So is that Yaprok? Am I saying the name right?
Yeah, Yaprok. Yeah.
Yaprok. What does your company do?
We're a one-stop community for all of gaming.
Okay.
I like it. I like it.
I laugh because we're all working on our decks and stuff, and that was like my new slogan that my advisors in the Sophic team helped me put together. But basically, we're a two-sided platform for gamers and also independent game developers. So gamers come to our platform to find and play games, developers on our platform put their games up on our site so that they can grow an audience around their games.
So you're like a marketplace.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
And what stage are you?
We are, we've never raised before, but we're at our growth stage. We have product market fit.
Okay, perfect. Anybody else?
We track our KPIs on a quarterly level, and then we run weekly meetings with OKRs, which is a little sticky because we're building houses fast. We're creating a new way to assemble houses, so the hardware and the actual connections of what the house is made out of. And sometimes it's a little subjective, but I find it really critical to try to get us into the language of measuring, even if what we're doing is more designy, because it lets us feel our momentum and also feel when we don't have momentum.
Yeah. Great. So the last point I wanted to make on the slide was, once you start with this approach that I described, it creates its own cadence and its own discipline, right? Because then you say, okay, how often do I want to report this? Oh, on a weekly basis or a daily basis, whatever. So once you start, I mean, it's kind of interesting how once you start with a metric or a set of metrics, okay, I can see a lot of hand signals from Elizabeth.
Now you're good.
Am I back?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Wow, that's kind of weird. So what I was saying was, once you start with this approach, it starts creating its own cadence and its own discipline, where you decide, okay, how frequently do I want to do this? On a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a hashtag basis. No.
One more time, Amit.
No, here's what I'll do. I will call in on audio on my cell phone. Okay. So then even if you lose video, at least you'll have audio. How's that?
Awesome. Yeah, I've had all day today. I wonder if it's the WeWork system. We've had lots of Zoom problems today. And so it could just be our network today.
I don't think it's yours. My last meeting was through us, and we had an issue. We had to actually send a link out, just like, so it probably just Zoom.
I don't blame Zoom. When in doubt. Nice sweatshirt, by the way, Megan.
Thank you. I see we shop at the same place.
I know. Proud to be twins with you.
Hey, by the way, do we supposed to feed that plant anything?
I think water.
Okay.
Your meeting ID followed by pound.
And then you'll want to mute us, Amit, on the computer.
Enter your participant ID followed by pound. Otherwise, just press pound to continue. Please enter. You entered 95948. This meeting password is invalid. Please re-enter the meeting password followed by. You have not entered any numbers. Please re-enter the meeting password followed by pound.
Hey, Amit, can you put us on mute or put yourself on mute?
You have not entered any numbers. Goodbye.
Okay. You guys still there?
Yeah. But yeah, as you're trying to do that, is there a way you could put us on mute maybe?
On mute?
Yeah.
Oh,
Because as you're, yeah.
Am I making a little too much noise for you guys? There you go. Here.
I can share an anecdote while we're doing this.
Yes, doll, do it.
We
Catch up.
originally had like a team of like 9 who all had amazing resumes, and obviously, you know, we were early in the process of learning, you know, how to hire and how to weed people out. So there were a couple of other issues, but one of the things that happened was I introduced OKRs, and like just the level of accountability that requires, like, okay, we're going to use metrics and we're going to like measure what we're doing. And I started to see people kind of self-destruct immediately. And so obviously our team has scaled back like Gideon, you know, in the Bible. And we're rebuilding, but I learned pretty quickly how important metrics are, not just for, you know, driving the business, but also keeping team members accountable.
Hello, hello.
Hey, hey.
Okay, so I've called in on my phone line now.
Yeah, sounds great.
So that's a backup. Okay, good. All right, awesome. So if you can't see my screen, then Elizabeth, I'm sure you'll start waving vigorously.
Yeah, no, we can see it. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Okay, good. Wow. Okay. So anyway, the last point for the 5th time is this idea around cadence, right? Because once you decide what priorities are important to you, what metrics are important to you, then obviously the next question it drives is how frequently you want to report them. Once you figure that out, then it drives a certain discipline around orienting your entire company around those metrics, and then also changing the culture and the language you use, because now you end up with a very objective set of ways in which you can measure progress, change priorities, the whole bit. Okay? So let's see. So I was going to share a few things. Of course, I started by sharing my experience at a Fortune 50 company, which is completely irrelevant to you guys. So let's actually turn to something that might be a little bit more relevant to your context. So three startups. These are all 3 startups that I founded in the last 5 years. And these are all very, very small startups. I'll start with Omnivore first. Omnivore is a volumetric video company. And what is volumetric video? Volumetric video, think of it as a 3D hologram where you can capture a video of someone or something from all directions simultaneously. And that's interesting because then as a viewer, you can decide how you want to watch the video, from which perspective, right? You want to be behind the person, in front of the person, whatever, right? So imagine watching a Drake concert and being able to virtually go on stage with him, right? Like in the real world, you'd get arrested and, thrown out of the concert, but, virtually you could do that. Okay, how cool would that be? Or you could view a UFC fight by being inside the ring, without getting your face bashed in, right? So it's this kind of this way of being able to virtually go anywhere you want within an environment and get that experience. And so, this is a lot of computer vision, a lot of processing, blah, blah, blah. And so the first question we asked was, or the second question we asked, I'm sure there was another first. The first was, do we have enough money to build this? The second was, how do we know that we are good enough? Okay. So of course, this team had these metrics and they told us, say, okay, we're getting better and better and better. But the question is, what is good enough? And good enough is really tough because it's entirely a subjective metric, right? How do you know that a photograph is good enough as a depiction of reality, right? Is it a measure of resolution? Is it a measure of color? Is it a measure of noise? Like, what is it? And so the thing that Omnivore came up with was they said, look, what we're going to do is we have this hologram, but what our test will be is that we will take a set of random pictures or real life pictures of the scene, And then we will compare those pictures versus the holographic representation. Okay? And we'll have some sort of objective way of comparing those two pictures. And the closer those two pictures are, the better we are in terms of our resolution and quality. Okay? And so there's an objective way that we could say, hey, we're getting closer and closer. Like today, for example, we are at 84%. A year ago, the team was at 51%. So you know you're objectively getting better and better. And so the customers we have live now, they've also adopted this lingo where they go, hey, if you can get to 87, then we will sign this $200,000 contract with you. Or some have said, hey, at 81, this is the amount of money we're willing to pay you. At 84, this is the amount of money we're willing to pay you. Okay? That's one example. Pitch conferencing is another one of our startups where what we've built is an AI-based model of the human voice. And what that allows us to do is that given any audio stream, we can remove anything that is not human voice from it. Okay? Now, why is that interesting? Like, for example, on this call, right now, everybody is muted except me. And the reason everyone's muted is a lot of it is because each of you are in an environment which has some ambient noise, and you don't want to disrupt the call with all the background stuff happening. Fridges opening, microwaves, toasters, door slamming. Sometimes it's toilets flushing. 5 weeks ago in the Supreme Court, there were some oral arguments being made, and halfway through the oral argument, you could actually hear a toilet flush. And there's a lot of speculation on the internet right now who it was, and the best guess right now is Antonin Scalia, that he actually went to the bathroom and forgot to mute while flushing. But that's a real thing that happens, and especially when everyone's working from home, I bet it's pretty common. So anyway, we can remove all that background noise. Okay? So now the question is, how do you measure efficacy? Right? How do you know that you've removed all of it? And again, how do you know when you're good enough? So one way of doing it is to say, I am going to start with a recording of, a person speaking in a completely noiseless environment, like in a soundproof room. Then I'm going to artificially inject a bunch of random noise, okay, into the audio. Then I'm going to feed it into my system to remove the noise, and then compare the result to the original noiseless audio. Okay? And then you can reduce that to a metric. So that's one way. Now we've experimented with at least like a dozen different ways of doing this. And I guess my point in bringing that up is you've got to figure out what is the most customer accessible and customer relevant way of measuring something that actually matters from a business outcome. And attached to that is, again, a metric of what is good enough? What are people used to, right? So a metric of saying it has to be soundless is probably unreasonable. A metric which says, hey, the same sound as you typically have in an ordinary office, which can be pretty noisy, or an ordinary conference room with all the echoes and everything, that's not a bad metric. So, it creates a synthetic metric for us, which again, we use for communicating, again, with employees and setting priorities, with investors and measuring progress, and with customers and saying, and oh, by the way, the other thing you can do now is you can say, hey, I can independently benchmark competitors. So Google this week announced that they have their own noise canceling thing. So what do we do? The first thing we did was we were going to benchmark against them. But it turns out we kicked their ass. We're much better. Okay? And we can objectively say that because we took their noise canceling, we took ours, and we saw the results, and we said, okay, we know what it is. Okay? So that allows you to have an objective, because normally if I get on a call with a customer and say, we are much better than Google, they say, yeah, you're full of shit. No way, right? Here we can show them the results and say, hey, here's an objective way of measuring it, and you can measure it yourself. So I guess my point in all of this is it really changes the conversation of how you, prioritize, have the conversation with customers, have the conversation with employees, and fundamentally know, it comes back to what I said in my first slide, how do you end up protecting yourself against believing your own propaganda, right? Because the only reason you do a startup is because you believe you are going to have the best solution for customers, okay? But belief is great, and it's necessary. It's a necessary but not sufficient condition for success, right? So how do you translate that into something that appropriately calibrates you? Okay, I'm going to stop talking now, or at least pause. I'd love to hear feedback, discussion. Does this resonate? What have you done in your companies that might be similar, might be different? I think Doll just unmuted, so yeah, I think she's ready to go.
Yeah, no, this is good because this is like my strength / Achilles heel, and we were just talking about it this morning. We do really well because part of my building my product was really difficult. So in the early stages, I was just telling the story of why this is important. And they call me the pitch queen. Like I'm really great at telling people like this is a thing, or this should be a thing. And that's selling versus where we are. And people, I don't even feel like it's so much me. It's just like people get caught up in this vision and where we can be, and then they kind of get confused in terms of where we are right now versus phase 2, phase 3. So this is really helpful for me as we continue to tweak kind of how we communicate and put things in perspective for investors. For example, we're about $450,000 into our seed round of 1.25. And we're Opportunity, by the way, so we use data to help you understand what's in your water in real time from any smart device. So yeah, the selling versus reality and metrics to help people see where we are versus where we're headed is great. So thank you.
Hey, this Megan. Yeah, so with our AI, we have 2 different AI systems, and we always show how we plan on measuring. Like in phase 1, you can expect 85% of accuracy. At phase 2, as we do more tests, this is what you can expect to be at 85%, then 90%, 95%, with the accuracy. And we tend to do ours, well, depending on the system, it always, with multiple people, that's okay. With multiple people using use our technology and being able to come up with a good metric of where our accuracy level is, and based off the time that we plan on having it.
Good. I think you're on mute, Gwen. Oh, there you go.
Okay, there you go. Hi. Yes, so my name's Igwem. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Shift Power Solutions. We're an energy tech company. We build IoT and hardware to intelligently manage distributed energy resources. So we're actually this week dealing with kind of making sure we're not, I guess you want to say, drinking our Kool-Aid or believing our own propaganda. So a real example is part of our energy management platform is we monitor tanks, diesel tanks. So all of the energy assets that our customers have. And we pride ourselves not only on being pretty accurate, but not pretty accurate, but extremely accurate, but also being able to detect abnormal activity. So not just monitoring levels, but being able to detect theft in particular, which is quite common in our market. And so our software engineer needed to develop the algorithm for that detection. We'll improve it. And he spent quite a bit of time doing that. And well, for one, he wanted to finish out the project, and we thought we were there, but we were like, well, how do we know that our detection of abnormal activities really is theft, and how good of a job are we doing at that? And so we actually had to charter a whole new project that's purely on validating, kind of a data-driven approach to validating how well we detect theft or abnormal activity and discerning what type of event that is. And so it was one of those cases where we actually, when scoping the project, didn't realize how much time thereafter would go into creating code to determine how accurate we're being thereafter and seeing if this is successful. But where it's helpful is we now have customers who are saying, well, why should I spend an extra $100 on your platform versus others? And we can clearly point to the data on how superior our approach is compared to others with numbers.
Yeah, that's terrific. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll jump in, Amit, with a question.
Yeah. Hey, Chris.
How you doing, buddy? Good to see you. You sold some startups recently, multiple startups. I'm curious, can you give us maybe an example of how you were using data with these early stage, very early stage players, and how you use that data to position yourself when, as your lab was looking to move those startups on?
Yeah. So in the last year, we've sold 3 companies. We sold Trusted Key last year to Workday. Now, in the case of Trusted Key, data, frankly, wasn't an integral part of the story there, because that was really about identity management and using, I know you're familiar with Trusted Key. But, in that case, I think the thing that was really important was the architectural approach that we took in putting the pieces together. And that was something that Workday found very, very valuable. Having said that, during due diligence, one of the things that they really wanted to see was how did we measure the quality and the security of the code on an end-to-end basis. Because at the end of the day, when you're buying an identity platform, you're really buying a secure platform. And so the investment we had made to rigorously test and bombard the system every day, every night, to make sure it was rigorous and scalable and really robust, really paid off. Because what we emphasized from day one was, from a reliability perspective and security perspective, we would regularly stress test it, but also make sure that the system was highly scalable. And that is one thing that is very, very valuable from a metrics perspective to Workday. Earlier this year in January, we also sold AnswerIQ to Freshworks, and there, the product had a lot of metrics built in, specifically around. So AnswerIQ uses AI to improve customer support, especially email-based customer support, by answering up to 80% of the inbound emails automatically. Okay, and so the metric there was really, really simple, which is how many times did you come up with an answer for an inbound email? The really interesting metric there was, so you can have two metrics, false positives and false negatives. In our context, a false positive was when we came up with an answer, but the answer wasn't a good answer. That's a false positive. A false negative is when the system says, hey, I don't have an answer. But in fact, it did have an answer. Maybe when the system says, I don't have a good answer, when in fact it did in fact have a good answer. So it turns out in customer support, you can be very tolerant of false negatives. It's okay. Customer isn't harmed because a human takes over. It really has an implication on cost, but nothing else. A false positive is terrible, right? Because you get an email at Groupon saying, hey, where's my pink flamingo? And your answer is, your your purple cat shipped yesterday, right? Which is just, or whatever, because the customer thinks you're a bozo. Not only did you not reduce cost, you actually increase cost, and you might have lost the customer. Okay, so triple whammy. Okay, and so the metric that was really, really important that had been important for all our customers was show us your false positive rate. Okay, and so the system was really optimized for reducing false positives. Okay, so now the question really is, there's two kinds of false positives. One is the false positives you encounter in a customer environment, which actually are quite difficult to measure, because you only know it's a false positive if the customer loops back and says, what kind of bozo system do you have running? Or is your customer support person drunk, right? Because they gave me this crazy answer. But a lot of the stuff will fall through the cracks because people will just give up and discuss. So that's hard to measure. So you actually have to synthetically create systems that send in, random things of varying complexity and try and come up with the right approximation of what false positive might look like. Okay? And so really what you have to, what all these things really taught me to do, at least in the last 5 years, was you have to start with customer in. Okay? Because when we first started, we said, okay, here's a beautiful algorithm. We're going to take a very scientific approach. In the end, it may be that nobody cares. You might have a beautiful algorithm. It might, split the atom 5 different ways. But if nobody cares, who cares? Right? That doesn't matter. What really, really matters is your metric relevant to a customer outcome? You start with that and then walk back from that. And so with Answer IQ, that's what we've done, fortunately. And that's what differentiated us versus all the other competitors.
Hey, Amit, I have a question around, I guess, outsourcing certain types of tools. Like, for example, for our metrics, we actually use Redash, which is really awesome. We can hook up like Google Analytics, but also our servers and just literally everything. And it gives me like an awesome dashboard. But I don't know of like anything that exists for things that go deeper. Like, for example, we built a recommendation system completely in-house to basically look at what gamers are playing on our platform and then serve up similar things, that they would be interested in, basically. And we kind of did that through like games they would be interested in, other users they would be interested in, content they would be interested in. But I'm, like thinking of ways to like scale that as a startup that's cost effective. Like, do you know, I'll let you, like, what advice do you have around that, I guess?
Yeah, let me, I know of at least 2 or 3 systems. Let me look up what I could recommend to you. After this call, maybe Elizabeth can connect us via email, and if you email me these questions, I'll try and get you some answers there.
Okay. Awesome. And Amit, I'm just going to, if you don't mind, send your email to the cohort as well. I know you're extremely busy.
No worries.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Amit is like one of those people that you can probably get a hold of like maybe twice a year. But of course, if he opens up his schedule for us, we would love that. Dal, Ugwam, you had another question. Do you want to jump in?
I think you're mute again.
I'm dialing in on my phone as well, so I have to unmute on. I keep muting on both. But yeah, I guess I'm thinking as like an early stage startup. We always hear the importance of capturing metrics, and especially as like an IoT company, there's like an infinite amount of things that I'd want to be capturing and measuring. But I'm constantly also trying to understand the balance of the bandwidth and the resources it takes to actually create the structure to capture all of this data. So if you just have any tips, suggestions, or can speak to your experience about how you balance the two and think about prioritization of certain metrics.
Yeah, so I promise you, this is not a glib answer, but I think the thing that actually is helpful here is, take a toddler mindset. So, what is what's like the first word a toddler learns when they start speaking? What? Somebody? Megan?
No.
No, the answer's no.
I thought mom. I don't have kids.
Neither of them have. No. Don't say mom and don't say no. No, the other question, which is incredibly annoying for, after a while, it's cute initially, but after that it gets annoying, is why. Everything is a why. Why? Okay? So when somebody proposes a metric to you, why? Okay, then come back with an answer. Okay, why? Okay? And if it doesn't connect with the customer outcome, toss it. Okay? It can be a really obnoxious way of doing it. Okay, initially it'll piss off your team. Okay? But, they'll quickly learn, hey, that is actually a very useful way of rooting out the things that actually matter versus things that are peripherally important. Like, for example, you say, hey, let's measure the number of pixels. Why? So, well, because we want to minimize the number of pixels. Why? Because it consumes less processing. Why? Well, because it has a cost thing. Okay. Well, does that relate to a customer outcome? Only indirectly, because maybe you can offer the service for less. But if it doesn't result in something that delights a customer, maybe it's a secondary metric. Maybe it's not a primary metric. Right? So you start with like the why. Does it result in the customer being really excited about your product, or being, or having a really great experience? And the answer is no. Then you say, okay, at best, it's the priority number 2 or priority number 3.
Yeah, I mean, I have a quick follow-up to that. My name is Cole. I'm actually Ugwem's co-founder. So kind of building off of this question here, I think that makes a ton of sense. That's definitely really helpful in terms of thinking about product metrics. And I'm interested in your take on company metrics, and whether you would say, as we think about not just how to describe our product and how to differentiate versus competition and things like that, that you would take the same approach to the company, right? And how we kind of describe progress, how that might go into like an investor pitch deck, for example. Like, what's the root end of that why that you think makes sense when we describe the company, not necessarily just the technology or the product?
Yeah. So look, all you guys, at least what I understand is you're pretty early stage companies, all the way to maybe Series A. And at that stage, essentially every investor, and by the way, I've been a pretty prolific investor. I've invested in probably 50 startups, lost of money on them. So I've had a few wins. I think all my investing is fueled by Redfin. I was actually the very first investor in Redfin a long time ago. So that's compensated for 1,000 sins. Anyway, any early stage investor, what they really care about is, well, are you going to make me money? Am I going to get my money back? And why are you going to be different than these 500 other guys who want to lose my money for me? Okay? And so part of it is the why. Part of it is the differentiation. And then, of course, there's the standard metrics everybody talks about, which is, hey, here's my revenue, here's my growth, here's my whatever. But when you talk about revenue, what's really helpful is you say, hey, here's the revenue I'm making and here's the growth of my revenue compared to these 2 other guys who are trying to solve the same customer problem, and their growth rate is 5x lower. Okay? Because then that begs the next question. Well, why are you so great? Well, I'm so great because A, I have a technological advantage, or I have a distribution advantage, or I have a cost advantage. Really, why? Okay? Well, I have a technological advantage because X, Y, Z. I have a cost advantage because of some technology or something. Right? All the stuff just basically ties together, and you start with, think of an investor as a customer in some sense, and they are a financial customer. And so again, the why for them is, why would an investor be really excited about giving me money? And the answer is because they think there's a low probability I'll lose their money and a higher probability I'll make money for them. Right? And so then you back up from that and you say, okay, here's why. Because I have customer evidence, I have this technological differentiation, maybe I have a team differentiation, and all those things strung together. But I would treat an investor just like a special kind of customer, which they are. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thanks. That is helpful. I think, and I think in particular that piece about differentiation really helps kind of think about that. Not just everybody speaks to revenue, but what about revenue do we want to speak to? Do we want to showcase to show why we're different and why that's special, and how that makes us look like a better deal than whoever else? So I think that's a great way of thinking about it.
One of the things I learned kind of in some ways the hard way is that if it's a good idea is not something that's really unique that nobody else has done. Because if nobody else has done it, it's probably a lousy idea. Okay. If it's a good idea, there's probably like at least 500 people who've thought about it, and maybe 3 or 4 people who are actually executing on it. Okay. And so if that's true, then the question is, hey, why is your ability to execute on the idea better than anybody else's? It's very, very rare that there's truly a singularity where you said, hey, look, I have mastered nuclear fusion, okay? And nobody else literally in the world can do that. That happens incredibly rarely. It's more like what's happening with COVID vaccines where, there's like 200 independent people who are all trying to develop a vaccine. And probably 5 people will finish in a dead heat simultaneously, which is the way most innovation happens.
Well, thank you so much, Amit. I mean, I've really appreciated your time today. I apologize again if for all the Zoom issues. It might be a WeWork thing, might just be a Zoom thing. So really appreciate you working through it with us and all the founders too. Appreciate you guys going on this fun tech ride with us through the workshop today. Thank you everyone so much for your time, Amit. You're the best. So many great keys there. Yeah, I love that it's go measure from the customer out, and then be really clear on your advantages that you're doing. And then from the investor's point of view, how are you going to make the money? We're all thinking about fundraising right now. The majority here are fundraising in Q3. Hint, hint, Amit. But 14 amazing startups. Always got to be pushing for them, as you know me well enough. So I will pass along your email to the cohort, and I will also follow up to get some tools for Yaprock and for everyone else for tracking metrics and what works and what doesn't for deep tech and maybe just in general. So on behalf of the cohort, thank you so much. You have a whole bunch of thanks also in the chat. So thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Really enjoyed this. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Amit.
Thank you.